The smoke from the bowl rises slow and heavy, carrying a smell like wet straw and burnt dust. Your hands are shaking, not from fear, but from the cold. A brutal winter grips the village, the kind that seeps into your bones and won't let go. The firewood is gone. The sun hasn't broken through the clouds in days. Outside, the snow crunches like glass. Inside, silence, except for your stomach, twisting, empty for nearly a full day. You look down. The meal, in front of you, barely moves. It's thick, grey, lumpy. Something between old porridge and mud scraped from a stable floor. You don't know what's in it. You're not sure you want to. But your child is watching, eyes wide, lips cracked from the dry wind. They need to eat. You need to pretend this is food. This is medieval survival, the kind built not on glory or swords, but on desperation, ancient hunger and techniques long forgotten. You lift the spoon slowly. The steam fogs your face. The cold is still there, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe colder than -6 Celsius. But this bite is all that stands between your family and nothing. The texture clings like it's alive. Could you eat what they ate just to see your child live another day? And this was just the beginning. They called it soup, but it looked like punishment. The bowl trembles slightly in your grip, not from your hands, but from how thin the liquid is, almost like it's trying to slip away. A pale brown, almost grey, with specks of something dark floating at the top. Maybe barley, maybe ash, maybe something worse. The smell hits you first. Damp straw, soaked wood, and that strange, sour note that only rainwater left sitting in a wooden bucket too long can carry. The kind of scent that clings to your nose, even when the bowl is empty. This was food barley, if you could call it that. Shriveled, dry, grown in dirt that hadn't tasted sun in weeks. Soaked in cold rainwater collected from a sagging roof. Maybe from leather tarps patched with rope. Boiled with bitter roots and tree bark when they could find it. Every sip scraped your throat like wet paper. It filled the belly just enough to stop the pain, but never long enough to stop the fear. There was no fire to warm it, just steam rising from a clay bowl warmed by body heat alone. A thin film on top, curled like skin. You feed it to your child anyway, because what else is there? You sip next. Hand close your eyes, not for peace but to stop yourself from gagging. This is survival, not romantic, not noble, just ancient, raw and real. And still, this was one of the better meals. What's the worst thing you've ever eaten just to make it through the day? Tell me in the comments. Because when this watery mix ran out, they reached for something even harder to chew, even harder to believe. It wasn't bread. It was survival in the shape of a brick. The crust cracks like dry earth beneath your fingers. Dust lifts from the surface, not flour, just fragments of bark, flecks of straw, maybe even ash or clay. It smells like wet wood left too long in the sun. Bitter, sour, hollow. The kind of smell that gets stuck in the back of your throat and doesn't leave, even after you swallow. This was the daily bread of the forgotten. Not baked in ovens, but pressed together near dying embers, sometimes just left under a rock warmed by fire. No yeast, no wheat, no comfort, just bark, stripped from trees that had nothing left to give. Straw, crushed into powder, scraped from old rooftops or pulled from the floors of empty barns. When it held together, it was food. When it didn't, they ate it anyway. Your teeth grind through the crust like splitting stone. Every bite is dry. So dry your tongue feels like leather. It fills the stomach just enough to fool the body, but the brain knows better. This wasn't meant for eating. It was meant for enduring. Mothers chewed it first, softening it for babies who couldn't swallow. Fathers gave their share away, pretending they weren't hungry. Children learned early that hunger wasn't a moment. It was a season. Sometimes they added sawdust to stretch it further, sometimes even clay. One slip in the mixture and what was meant to keep you alive and started to do the opposite. This was medieval survival, not glorious, not noble, just real. Bitter, dry, and brutal. Can you imagine calling this a good day? And when this bread ran out, they dug even deeper, into roots that could kill or save, depending on who picked them. One wrong leaf, and your last meal might be your last breath. The forest was silent, heavy with frost. Every branch crackled under the weight of ice. The ground was too hard to dig, the animals long gone, the grain stores empty since the last snowfall. Hunger didn't knock. It settled in your bones, so you walked. eyes scanning every bush, every sprout that hadn't yet shriveled in the cold. Not for flavor, not for nutrition, but for something, anything that could go down and stay down. You find it. A small green leaf, curled and bitter, sharp at the tip, with veins like black spider webs. You've seen it before. Maybe. Was it the one that made old Marta sleep for 3 days? Or the one that took the neighbor's goat last spring? Does it matter? Because tonight, your child hasn't moved in hours. No tears, just shallow breath and skin that feels too cold for someone still alive. And this plant in your hand might buy you one more day. They chewed bark, they boiled moss, but in the hardest winters, peasants turned to wild herbs. Some were bitter, some made the world spin, some just made it end faster. But when you live on the edge of collapse, even poison can feel like hope. The old women knew what to pick. Mostly they passed down knowledge like spells. Boil this one, dry that one. Never eat it raw. Only the poor made those mistakes twice. They mixed it with broth when broth still existed. They rubbed it into their gums to stop the hunger shakes. A handful of leaves could numb the stomach or stop the heart. The line between medicine and death was thinner than snow on a dying fire, and yet they kept going. Because medieval survival wasn't just about skill. It was about risk, about standing at the edge of something dangerous and biting down anyway. Would you feed your family something that might kill them, just to see if it wouldn't? Like this story so far, tap like and subscribe for more forgotten truths, because when even the leaves grew scarce and they started digging through frozen earth, looking for something colder and far harder to swallow, they didn't pull food from the ground. They tore it from the frozen jaws of death. The soil was no longer soil, it was stone, cold, cracked and cruel. Every step outside felt like a punishment. Every breath stabbed the lungs. The cold had dropped below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, more than -6 Celsius, and stayed there, day after day, week after week. And yet they dug, with bare hands, with sticks, with shards of metal pulled from ruins, fingernails chipped, skin split, knuckles raw, because they knew what might lie beneath. Roots, maybe bitter, maybe fibrous, maybe full of life, or maybe nothing. The roots they pulled were never soft, never sweet. They came up stiff, crusted in dirt and ice, like the bones of the forest itself. You'd beat them against rocks just to make them pliable, gnaw at the ends like an animal. Hope your teeth didn't break before the root gave in. Sometimes they were poisonous. Sometimes they caused cramps so fierce you couldn't stand, but the alternative was hunger, and hunger doesn't ask questions. This was the taste of survival in winter. Cold, metallic, gritty, the kind of food that didn't warm the body, just delayed the collapse. You'd watch children chew silently. No complaints, no emotion. Just the slow, tired rhythm of someone who understands that food isn't about pleasure anymore. It's about staying vertical. And when the roots ran dry, or were buried too deep under frostbitten earth, you looked elsewhere. You listened for something. Anything. A sound in the snow. A scurry in the barn. Because if something moved, it meant luck. Or dinner. Or both. And that's when survival started to look you straight in the eye, with fur and claws and a heartbeat. If it twitched, hopped, flew, or squeaked, it could be dinner. The rules of survival had changed. There were no lines left between food and filth, between meal and vermin. The cold didn't care about dignity, and neither did the hunger. Footsteps in the snow weren't a threat. They were a blessing. A rat behind the barrels. A crow perched too long on a frozen branch. A frog trapped in the mud, slowed by the chill. You didn't see pests. You saw calories, you moved fast, silent, desperate. A snapped twig, a sudden flap of wings. Every sound made your heart race, not from fear, but from hope. Rats were the most common. Fat from the grain they stole, quick, clever. But traps were easy. Stones easier. And once you had one, the skin peeled off like old cloth. You roasted it over flame if you had one. If not, you did what you had to. Crows were smarter. Dark eyes, sharp beaks. You had to be patient, but their meat, black and bitter, filled. The belly better than prayer. Still, every bite tasted like smoke and punishment. And frogs, let's just say they didn't taste like chicken. Slippery, gummy, more texture than flavor. You scraped off the skin, boiled the rest, and swallowed without chewing. Kids would gather around the fire, chewing on tails, wings, bones, not because they liked it, but because they didn't know anything else. This was life. This was medieval. Survival, and the worst part, these were the fresh ones. because what didn't get away but often sat and rotted and still found its way onto the plate. Next, we'll open that plate and see what happens when time, salt, and desperation turn insides into something disturbingly edible. It didn't smell like food. It smelled like something that should have been buried. The first thing to hit you wasn't the sight. It was the smell. A thick, greasy stench that hung in the air like wet rope and old death. It crept under doorways, clung to skin, sank into the walls. People turned their heads. Dogs howled, and still. They ate. This was offal. Not just meat, not muscle, but guts. Intestines, kidneys, liver, stomach linings. Everything the butcher left behind. In normal times, you'd throw it to the pigs. In winter, you were the pig. Sometimes they salted it. That helped. A little. Other times they just left it in barrels. Let the cold and time do what they could. Days passed. Weeks. The insides of animals slowly breaking down into something soft enough to chew and strong enough to make your eyes. Water. It didn't bubble, it fizzed, like something alive, like something angry. They'd pull out a piece with bare hands, wipe the slime on their sleeve, slice it with a knife that hadn't been cleaned since autumn, and they'd eat it. No flavor, no warmth, just weight, and the illusion of fullness. Heavy. It stayed in the gut longer than broth or bark. It gave the illusion of fullness, a trick the stomach could believe in. Children gagged, mothers whispered prayers. Some villagers claimed the smell never left their homes, even after spring came. But here's the thing about survival. It doesn't ask what you like. It asks what you'll tolerate when there's nothing else. Would you rather face starvation or a bowl of warm, fermented guts? And when they couldn't find meat, when even the offal was gone, they turned again to bread. But by then it came with something else inside, something small, something moving. When survival is the only recipe, even mold and rat teeth become ingredients. The flour sack was soft to the touch, not from freshness but from rot. It smelled damp, faintly sour, like wet hay left too long in a cellar. Open it and a cloud of dust rises, brown, grey, green, speckled with black dots of mold. Movement too. Little ones. Crawling. Nesting. Chewing. They didn't toss it out. They sifted what they could. Or didn't. They poured it straight into the bowl, added cold water, a pinch of salt if they had it, and stirred until it formed something like dough, something that looked like bread, from far away. The grain was old, months, maybe years past its prime, stored in damp cellars, gnawed by rats who'd left behind more than teeth marks, droppings, fur, sometimes even bones. But no one asked. No one had the strength to care. Once baked, the crust looked normal, golden even, but crack it open and it was dense, heavy, spongy in a way bread shouldn't be. A smell escaped, part yeast, part mildew, part memory. They called it bread, because calling it what it really was might break you. Children chewed in silence. Elders dipped it in broth to soften the texture, and if you bit into something that crunched unexpectedly, you didn't ask what it was. There was no luxury of disgust, only choices between weakness and fuel. This wasn't a one-time thing, it was daily life. A routine built from desperation, from scraps, from what the rats didn't finish. And still, they gave thanks, because moldy bread was better than nothing. And sometimes, better than nothing was the best anyone could hope. For like what you've heard so far? Give it a like and hit subscribe for more forgotten truths of medieval survival, because next, they boiled bones. Not for meat, not for flavor, but for the idea of warmth. They didn't eat to fill their stomachs. They ate to remember what fullness used to feel like. The pot sat in the center of the hut, blackened with soot, its bottom scorched from too many nights over too little fire. Inside the broth simmered, if you could call it that. No meat, no fat, just bones, old ones, picked clean long ago, cracked, scraped, hollow, from animals long gone and dinners long forgotten. Rib bones, knuckle bones, sometimes even teeth, tossed in water and left to bubble until the water turned cloudy, murky like melted candle wax. The smell was faint, like boiled water with a whisper of something familiar, almost like food. Steam curled upward, carrying the ghost of meat, a memory of fat, not real flavor, just suggestion. They added what they could, a sliver of wild onion, maybe a strip of moss, Once someone dropped in a sliver of salted leather. Just for texture, it wasn't soup, it was hope. You cupped your hands around the bowl. It didn't warm you. Not really. But it gave your fingers something to hold. Gave your mind something to believe in. The heat pressed against your lips, sharp and thin, like drinking the idea of warmth rather than warmth itself. Children slurped with closed eyes, as if imagination could make it richer. Elders chewed the bones after, not to get anything out, but because chewing felt like survival. There was no chewing, no crunch, just hot liquid. Then silence, then cold again. Still, they were grateful, because in a world stripped bare, even the bones of bones had value. Tell me, have you ever tried to taste something that isn't there just to convince yourself you're still alive? Because next we're going deeper, not into the broth but into the flour and what was crawling inside it. When hunger ruled the world, even crawling things became blessings in disguise. You open the sack of flour, what's left of it. It feels soft, warm in the hands, almost comforting. But the moment it stirs, the illusion breaks. They're in there, tiny movements, a ripple across the surface. Not flour settling, not air, but life larvae. And sometimes as they didn't just crawl in, they crawled out, pale, squirming, quiet. They bury themselves deep, like they know they shouldn't be seen, but they're there. Every handful has them, in the corners, in the cracks, in the parts no one dares to sift anymore. And still, as you scoop it up, you mix the dough. You bake the bread, because there's no time, no strength, no luxury to separate what's edible from what's more extra. The oven, if you even had one, won't burn them all. Some cook into the crust. Some survive inside. Soft, folded into the middle like raisins from hell. The smell isn't bad, just earthy, nutty even. A warmth that fills the air and masks the truth. The crust rises. The loaf looks real, familiar, almost beautiful. But every bite crunches in places it shouldn't. And no one says a word. Children chew slower. Elders avoid eye contact. But no one spits it out. Not in winter. Not when calories meant survival. Protein, they whispered. That's what they told themselves. That's what made it okay. This was peasant resilience, not clever. Not clean, just brutal. Honest. Human. What would you do if your next meal blinked at you first? And yet, through all of this rot, filth, and crawling madness, there was still something that gave them pride. Something sacred. Something worth holding on to. They didn't eat to live well. They ate to keep the fire of their bloodline alive. Now your body would have adapted. Not to comfort, but to hardship, the cold, the mold, the silence, and the taste of things you'd never once imagined chewing. But here's the part no one talks about. They weren't ashamed. There was no pity in the village, no weakness in the firelight. If you ate bark, rats, and worms, you weren't disgusting. You were strong. This was peasant pride, quiet, weathered, unbreakable. Not the kind you wore on your chest, the kind you carried in your hands, cracked and calloused from digging roots in frozen earth, in your back, sore from bending, over fields that gave nothing. In your voice, hoarse from a hunger that never left. They didn't just survive the impossible, they made art out of it. Bread that fed 20 with a single handful, a stew made from bones, bark, and prayer, a meal scavenged from a world that had nothing left to give. And still they gave thanks, because what they had was more than food. It was knowledge, passed down like treasure, taught beside fires, whispered in the dark, remembered when there was nothing else left to remember. Not everyone made it, but those who didn't forget. Would you carry that same fire, the kind that doesn't warm your body, but keeps your soul from breaking? And maybe, just maybe, that's what we've lost. But there's still one more bite to take, a final lesson, boiled down over centuries. And it's not about what they ate. It's about why they never stopped. They fed their bodies with scraps, and their bloodlines with fire. No one at that table smiled, no one reached for seconds. But somehow, every single bite carried a legacy. They weren't eating to celebrate. They were eating to endure, to push the flame forward one more night, one more storm, one more generation. The food was barely food, but the act of eating it, that was everything. Because even in those brutal winters, even when the air sliced skin and the woodpile vanished and the bread was crawling, they passed the bowl anyway, and in that act, they left us something. Something quiet, something unshakable. Kind of wisdom not taught in books, but cooked into memory, baked into instinct, preserved in the bones of those who survived. The truth is, Medieval survival isn't just history. It's a reflection of us, of what we become when the lights go out, the shelves go empty, and all that's left is who we really are. If this journey touched your soul, join our brotherhood of survivors. Subscribe and stand with those who remember. Tell us in the comments, which of these forgotten meals would you dare to feed your family? Your like helps keep this fire alive, the fire of ancestral wisdom. Share this with someone who might need it before the cold comes. And don't stop here. The next video is the next step in your preparation for a world without comfort.